There is a castle in the middle of the snow-capped mountains, with lights burning in its windows. All you can see around is endless snow and mountains. This is Snowy Eagle Ridge. There is an elk standing in the middle of the forest. He looks deep into the trees, steam escaping from his mouth. Against the background of white snow, someone's shadow stands out very clearly. Someone runs forward at high speed, kicking up small lumps of snow. A man's hand reaches for a weapon in a brown sheath. The man has black hair, tied at the top of his head with a burgundy ribbon. He looks ahead with his red-orange eyes, his thin eyebrows furrowed tightly. A sharp spear flies forward. There are trees covered with snow around. The man makes some sound. The tip of the spear pierces the deer in the back, blood gushing from the wound. He falls to the ground with his head up. On his head are large branched horns. A little boy sits in the snow, resting one knee on the ground. He is wearing a blue vest with fur, tied with a green belt, a light green shirt and pants. On his feet are rather high boots with fur. The boy extended his hand forward, the other is behind his back. His teeth are clenched tightly, and his gaze is firm and focused. This is Dongbo Zuying, a boy only 8 years old. Someone dressed in red claps his hands. This man praises the boy, saying that he did an excellent job. The boy happily turned back, lowering his previously outstretched hand down. 2 men stand behind him. One is dressed in a long red coat with a fur collar, and he is clapping his hands. On his head, his hair is held in place by a traditional headdress. Next to him stands a huge half-man, half-lion. He is significantly taller than the man in red. His body is human, and his head is a white lion. Behind his back is a weapon in a sheath, and a beige scarf is tied around his neck. He is dressed in blue-gray clothes, with strips of fabric with fur tied to his belt. This half-man, half-lion is called Tong San. The boy exclaims joyfully and calls out to them, calling the man in red Daddy, and the other Uncle Tong San. The carcass of a dead animal lies on the snow. The spear still pierces him. One of the men asks if the other one now believes him, and exclaims that this child is really strong. The men move closer to the boy, who had already risen to his feet. They are standing opposite each other. The boy boasts that he hit the bullseye and asks if he now needs to train further. Tong San looks at the boy. He smiles with his huge mouth. His left eye is crossed by a long scar, and steam comes out of his mouth. He tells Soen that he has pretty good potential for being so young. When he grows up, he will definitely be able to surpass his father. The boy looks up at Tong San. With one hand he holds onto the sheath into which the spear is already inserted. His mouth is wide open, a cloud of steam escaping from it. The eyes are widened in fascination and surprise. He stammers and asks about the fact that he can surpass his father. He then asks another question. Can he really become even stronger than a Tian-ranked knight? The boy stands against the backdrop of the moon. He looks straight ahead with his mouth slightly open. The ends of the ribbon that holds his hair flutter in the wind. His father put his hands on his shoulders. He stands in front of his son and looks down at him. Tong San is standing nearby. There is a coniferous forest around them. Small snowflakes are falling from the sky. The father tells his son that as long as he works tirelessly, he will definitely move mountains. Morning comes. The forest and ridge are illuminated by the sun. The castle tower is visible. The boy replies that he understood his father's words. The snow lying on the sharp peaks of the mountain range glistens under the sun. On one of the peaks stands the tall Zushi Castle. The main building is in the shape of a circle. There are several towers. Several roads lead in different directions from the castle. The boy enters the castle gates with long strides. He raised one hand up, fingers spread out. Walking next to him is his father and Tong San, who is carrying a deer carcass on his shoulders. Knights dressed in metal armor bowed, kneeling on one knee. Soen exclaims loudly. Calling his mother, he says that they are home. A beautiful woman with white hair turns her head towards this scream. Her outerwear has a fluffy white fur collar. She holds her hand on the red cloth. The woman is dressed in a blue dress and has gold jewelry on her neck and forearm. In her arms, clutched to her chest, she holds a child who is dressed in a red cape with fur. This is Mo Yan Yu. She is Dong Bo's wife. Turning to those who entered, she questioningly calls her son and husband by name. Young Yu knelt down, a wide happy smile on her face, and she stretched her arms slightly forward. A small child, smiling joyfully and raising his hands up, runs towards Zhu Ying. He goes to meet the baby, holding out his hands. The baby joyfully calls his brother. He no less happily calls her by name. The child's name is Dongbo Qingxi and he is 2 years old. Zhu Ying and Qingxi are opposite each other. The boy looks down at his younger brother, raising one hand up and sticking out his thumb. Qingxi looks at his elder brother carefully and listens to him. Zhu Ying says that today they managed to catch a huge deer. The kid asks him about the deer. distorting his words. The father of the family took King Shi in his arms and smiles. The child reaches out to his father. Yang Yu walks forward with his hand on his son's shoulder. Zhu Ying looks at his father and King Shi with a smile. Next to the family, a little behind is Tong San. Dongbo says that it was a real wild deer. Zhu Ying was able to kill it while hunting. Today they will have a feast. King Shi joyfully repeats the word feast, distorting it, pronouncing the last letter incorrectly. Zhu Ying continues to walk in front of her parents. His mother looks ahead and opened her mouth to say something. She corrects King Shi about how to pronounce the word correctly. Suddenly the woman notices something. It makes her nervous. A bead of sweat runs down her cheek due to her excitement. She stops anxiously and looks back. Her mouth is slightly open. Fear is visible in her eyes. The rest of the family and Tong Sin continue walking forward without looking back. A bird with 4 wings flies over a snow-covered ridge. There are huge high mountains around, and there is a large reservoir in front of the ridge. The woman thinks that this cannot be. It was already dark. The stars were shining in the sky. White clouds of steam rise near the castle. Yang Yu stands on the edge of the roof, still wearing the same dress. The wind blows her long snow-white hair. The woman wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to keep warm. Snowflakes fly next to her. The woman looks into the distance with a worried expression on her face. A red cloak with a fur collar falls over her shoulders. Yang Yu glances sideways. She didn't expect this. A tear runs down her cheek. The woman looks sad. Her husband stands behind her. He covered his wife's shoulders with a cloak and left his hands on her shoulders. He looks down at her, a small cloud of steam escaping from his mouth. Yang Yu looks surprised to see him. Dongbo asks her what's wrong. She seems worried about something lately. The woman narrows her eyes and looks forward. The bangs develop in the wind and get in the way, flashing before the eyes. She answers that she has a bad feeling. The man stands with his arm around the woman's shoulders and his hands on them. He is much taller than her, and next to him she looks fragile. Yang Yu literally drowns in the cloak with which he covered her. They stand together on the roof, looking forward, the stars shining above them. Yang Yu continues to say that she has a feeling that they are about to find them. The moon is hiding behind a high mountain. Snowflakes fly in the air. The mountain range and forest are hidden in the darkness, but because of the snow they can be seen. Dongbo, addressing his wife, calling her dear, says that 8 years have passed since they moved to this city. He asks if this place hasn't been peaceful all this time. The woman says he suffered because of her and the children. She glances sadly and guiltily in his direction, turning her head slightly. The man smiles widely and winks at his wife. Yang Yu says that she is the one who got him into all this. Dongbo asks her to stop talking about negative things. A man and a woman are next to each other and looking straight ahead. Yang Yu parted her mouth as if in surprise. The man raised his hand, clenched into a fist, to chest level. He smiles widely and proudly. He says that Zhu Ying was at his best today. He is definitely a genius. The man looks forward, smiling, clearly proud of his child. The warrior, hidden in the shadows, stands with his feet shoulder-width apart. He holds the weapon tightly in one hand. On his head is a high tail that blows in the wind. His figure from the back is highlighted in red. Dongbo says that in no more than 2 years, his son will definitely be able to achieve incredible combat power. Zhu Ying holds a book in his hands, opening it. Warriors are drawn on the pages, and there are some inscriptions nearby. Zhu Ying asks King Shi whether he would like to become a great warrior or not. King Shuo sits on the floor next to his brother and plays with a ball. Zhu Ying raised the book above his eyes and looked at it with an enthusiastic face. There is a small stack of books in front of him. Zhu Ying says that today uncle and dad said that one day he will be able to surpass the Tianjai rank knight himself. King Shi asks again, repeating after his brother and distorting the words, as if asking to explain who a knight of the Tian rank is. Zhu Ying reads a book to his younger brother, who sits in front of him and listens with interest. He imagines several warriors, the first standing with a shield and sword in his hand. The second holds axes in both hands. The third has a strange weapon that looks like a scythe. The fourth is dressed in massive armor. The fifth holds many blades in his hands and has strange armor on his face, giving the impression that he has 2 pairs of eyes. The sixth warrior looks the largest of all, with an unusual hairstyle on his head that looks like a comb. The last warrior seems to be the most impressive. He has a high tail on his head and some kind of spikes on his shoulders. He holds a weapon that can be mistaken for an extension of his arms. Zhu Ying corrects King Shi. He then begins to explain that knights have a total of 7 ranks of strength, such as Ren, Dai, Tian, Liu Xing, Zhen Yu, Cheng Hao, and Ko. Among them all, the first 3 ranks are ordinary, but Liu Xing, Zhen Yu, and Ko Hao are considered strong. But Ko Fan has the strongest aura. The boy represented the warriors according to this table, from weakest to strongest. Zhu Ying imagines a battle in front of him. Knight rank KO Fan deals with the monsters, cutting them in half. From his long spear, flashes of fire scatter in all directions. The boy continues to say that once a person reaches this rank, he ceases to be mortal. Their physical power is so great that it is impossible to imagine. No matter how many warriors challenge him, he will defeat them all. No one can touch or injure him. The warrior moves forward with his arms outstretched and his weapon in front of him, his profile hidden in the shadows, looking confident. Knight rank KO Fan flies towards huge monsters. He is enveloped in a bright fiery light. Opposite him are monsters that are much larger than him. The mouth of the nearest one is open and a huge number of teeth are visible in it. There are several pairs of horns on his head and long claws on his hands, capable of cutting up the bodies of lava giants living in a demonic purgatory that even the gods fear. Knight KO Fan cut the huge monster into 2 pieces with one blow and landed on the ground. He sits on one knee and holds his weapon in both hands. Hair develops from this movement. He destroys any target in his path, striking everyone with skill. He is the true protector of humanity. A knight in armor with a red ribbon attached to his helmet flies forward. One of his hands is extended behind his back, in which he clutches a sword. He extended his other hand forward in front of him. His entire figure is shrouded in light. It falls from top to bottom at high speed. From his fall there remains a pillar of light, like from the fall of a star. The knight landed and stuck his sword into the ground. Due to the impact, pieces of earth and dust scattered in different directions. The knight sits, holding the hilt of his sword tightly with both hands. Dongbo and his wife turn around. The man has his hand on Yang Yu's shoulder. Fear and great surprise are written on their faces. The warrior continues to sit on the ground. He rests his hand on his bent knee. Tong Sen appears behind him, baring his teeth furiously, and looking at the back of the sitting warrior. A long sword is clutched in his hand. He tells him it was impressive. Tong Sen growls furiously with his mouth wide open. He jumps, leaving the ground high and flying straight at the knight. In the hands of the half-man, half-lion, there is a strange weapon. It has a very long handle, and rings are inserted along the entire blade. The knight has already risen to his feet. He holds a sword in one hand, the other is clenched into a fist. He looks directly at the attacker Dong Sen. He invites the knight to try to repel his blow. Tong Sen brings the blade of his sword closer to the knight's head. He meets the blow with his sword. Sparks fly as the 2 weapons collide. The knight stands with his sword raised and looks at Tong Sen. He flies in the opposite direction due to the fact that the warrior parried his blow. Tong Sen flies quite a long distance, touching the ground with his body several times and bouncing further. Clouds of dust rise up due to the collision. The knight's armor glows with blue fire. It stands surrounded by castle walls. Dongbo looks down in shock, a bead of sweat running down his face. He looks worried. His mouth is slightly open and his eyes are wide. Tong Sen sits on the ground with one knee resting on it. He presses one hand to himself. The other holds the sword, resting it on the ground, thereby helping yourself to hold on. Blood is flowing from his mouth. It is clear that the blow was very strong. A large cloud of dust gathered around Tong Sen. Dongbo asks if this is the knight ranked Liu Xing. Tong Sen, in turn, is amazed at how strong this knight is. The knight stands with his sword extended upward and looks at the tower. Dongbo and his wife were sitting on it. Yang Yu looks down with alarm and fear. A bead of sweat runs down her cheek, her arms crossed under her chest. The knight still stands in the same position, and Tong Sen sits behind him, pressing his hand to his stomach. You can tell by his appearance that he is in pain. The knight asks the woman if she now understands that it is useless to resist. Orders her to be a good girl and give up immediately. Tong Sen tells the knight that he first needs to deal with whoever surrounded him. Many people in armor stand near and on the wall. They all hold weapons in their hands and are aimed at the knight. He stands in the midst of the warriors surrounding him. There are simply a huge number of them. Tong Sen is also standing nearby and watching what is happening. Dongbo looks down worriedly and a little aggressively. He's clearly concerned about what's happening and doesn't like it. He tells the knight that he may be strong in one-on-one duels, but Dongbo will see how he handles 500 posing ranked crossbowmen. Each of their arrows will pierce him through, because he has nowhere to run. The knight stands calmly in the middle of the encirclement. It seems that he does not care at all. He grasps the sword with both hands and holds it in front of him, with the blade down. Tong Sen stands a few steps away from him and holds his weapon at the ready. The knight says that it is surprising to have so many archers in such a small town. It seems that they still have a chance to defeat him. The red cloak slides off Yang Yu's shoulders, one hand pressed to her chest. Indignation and anxiety are written on her face. Her mouth is open in a scream. A man dressed in a dark blue cloak and holding a staff. There is some kind of amulet tied around his neck. A hood is thrown over his head. Because of this it is impossible to see his face. A huge four-winged bird appears in the sky, with lightning bolts of energy emanating from it in different directions. The bird flexed its claws, preparing to land. Yang Yu has his back turned, but notices the animal. The woman's eyes are wide open, her eyebrows slightly furrowed. She shouts that these lands belong to Dongbo, protected by the emperor himself. She goes on to ask how the knight had the audacity to invade here. The cloaked man calls out to Yang Yu. He orders her to stop causing trouble around her. Bright lightning, light blue lightning strikes down. The four-winged bird hovered over the castle, spreading all its wings to the sides. It glows and emits lightning energy in all directions. They reach out to the warriors and destroy their weapons, breaking them into pieces. Someone starts screaming loudly. Most likely many voices form one common cry. Lightning strikes not only weapons, but also the warriors themselves. They scream, fear written on their faces. A huge bird, with its beak open, hovered in the air above the tower. A huge full moon shines in the sky. Snowflakes and rare lightning bolts of power are in the air. On the back of the bird you can see the silhouette of a man in a raincoat. The bird caught its claws on the edge of the tower and laid its head forward so that its owner could descend. Lightning comes from the cloaked man's staff. His face is still impossible to see. Under the hood, only complete darkness is visible. Yang Yu and Dongbo are standing next to each other. The cloak is again put on the woman's shoulders. They look at the arriving man in surprise. A man in a cloak reaches out with his hand to remove the hood from his head. It becomes clear that his hair is snow white. He took off his cloak and it turned out that he was a handsome man with delicate features. He has red-orange eyes, a gold jewelry with a red stone in the center hanging on his forehead, and earrings in his ears. This is Mu Yongchen. He asks Yunyai to tell him if she will still resist. The woman's eyes are wide open, her pupils constricted. Beads of sweat run down your cheeks. The woman rushes towards Yongchen, throwing the cloak off her shoulders and letting it fall to the ground. Dongbo stands and looks amazed, his hands raised at waist level. Yongchen stands calmly next to his bird and holds a staff in his hand. Yang Yu exclaims in surprise and calls Yongchen brother. The woman falls to her knees in front of her brother and reaches out to him with her hands. Yongchen stands calmly, slightly tilting his head down. In one hand he still clutches the staff and stretches the other forward. Yang Yu rose to her feet and stood very close to her brother. She looks happy, although a little worried. The man does not express any emotions and looks at her calmly. Yang Yu exclaims that they have not seen each other for 19 years. She addresses him, making the assumption in her question that he is now in the kingdom of Xingchen. He asks if it was Jun Yu's decision. The man only makes an indistinct sound in response. Yongchen closes his eyes, his eyebrows furrowed slightly. With one hand he touches the woman's neck. She opened her mouth in surprise. Yongchen says that Yang Yu went against the rules of their house. He always adhered to them and humbly waited a whole millennium to inherit the title of heir. And all who oppose the will of the heir are sinners and must be punished. He came all this way on purpose to bring her back. Yang Yu is shocked and scared, her eyes wide and sweat running down her cheek. The mouth is open from the realization of his brother's words. The woman leans forward sharply and tries to hug her brother. Because of this movement, he releases the staff from his hands. The man has a serious and dissatisfied expression on his face. Yang Yu shouts that she doesn't want to go back. Now she is living the life she has wanted for so long. He tells Yongchen that he has no right to treat her so recklessly. The man raised his hand to eye level and curled his fingers. A scroll appears above them, shrouded in a bright yellow-orange glow. The man's eyes are closed as if from annoyance and fatigue. He says that even when Yang Yu faces death, she still remains as stubborn as she is. The woman stands a few steps away from her brother and looks at him. Yongchen raised his hand in front of him. He looks at the huge scroll that is hanging in the air in front of him. He reads out loud what is written on the scroll. Imperial decree on the Mo Yang family's sentence. Mo Yan Yu, daughter of the Yang clan, is sentenced to imprisonment for 1 century. Yang Yu is shocked by what she heard and looks scared and sad. Dongbo is also amazed by what he hears, his teeth clenched tightly and a bead of sweat running down his cheek. Yongchen continues reading and says that Baron Dongbo Lai is sentenced to slave labor for 1 century. Yongchen stares at the scroll in front of him. His eyes begin to glow with red fire, as if they are shining from within. He ends the reading by saying that the bailiff is Mo Yanchen. The bird on which the heir flew looks simply huge in comparison with the tower. She continues to sit patiently and wait for her owner. The huge moon still shines in the background. One of the 7 asks how this is so, but does not finish the sentence. A sharp spear flies from somewhere from the side. Yang Chen notices the movement and glances towards it. Someone tells him to shut up. Yang Chen moves out of the path of the spear, but it tears the scroll with the decree into several pieces. Yang Yu watches this in fear and surprise. You can easily read these emotions on her face. Dongbo looks towards Yi Chen with his eyes wide open. Zhu Ying, holding his weapon in his hand, flies forward towards Yang Chen. The boy's second hand is set aside and clenched into a fist. The man stands calmly and only turns his head towards the boy. The staff is standing next to Yang Chen. He is not holding it with his hand. However, he deftly catches the boy's spear and squeezes it tightly in his palm. Zhu Ying looks at this in surprise, a bead of sweat running down his face, his brows furrowed and his eyes wide. Yang Chen looks completely calm and bored. He doesn't seem to attach much importance to what's happening. Dongbo screams, worried about his son. His brows are furrowed and sweat is running down his face. The boy is surprised that his attack was interrupted so easily. Yang Chen says that Zai Ying is quite brave. Dongbo shouts his son's name. Yang Chen continues to stand in his place. He has not moved a single step. In one motion, he snatches the spear from the boy's hands and throws him back. Zhu Ying flies backwards with his mouth open in Eureka. The boy quickly moves forward, spreading his legs in the air. Dongbo runs to meet Zhu Ying. He strives to help the child. Dongbo catches his son, he hits him on the chest and they fly back a little by inertia. Longbo's face is twisted. He clearly experienced not the most pleasant sensations both from worrying about his son and from the collision. Yang Yu watches this with his mouth wide open in fear. The boy grimaces, one of his eyes is closed. He presses the knuckles of his right hand to his face. His teeth are clenched tightly, just like his father's. He stands behind his son and holds him by the shoulders. The boy exclaims how much pain he is in. The boy looks forward angrily, his hand clenched into a fist near his chest. He furrowed his brows and opened his mouth, a bead of sweat running down his cheek. Yang Chen looks back at the boy. There are no special bright emotions on his face. Zhu Ying asks him if he is his uncle and how he can do this to them. Tells him defiantly to defeat him first. Dongbo sits with his knee on the ground and holds the struggling Zhu Ying in his hands. He half turns around and looks over his shoulder. Yang Yu also turns around and looks anxiously at little Qingxi, who is walking towards his parents with his arms stretched out in front. Yang Chen watches this with detachment, holding a staff in his hand. Qingxi calls his mom, dad and brother, saying that he is scared. Little Qingxi begins to cry loudly, streams of tears flowing down his cheeks. Dongbo looks forward with anxiety and hopelessness, sweat running down his cheek, his teeth clenched tightly. Yang Yu is also crying, tears running down her cheeks. She looks sad and mentally broken. Zhu Ying gets angry. He frowns and shouts with his mouth open. The woman calls Qingxi by name, calls her children, but does not finish the sentence. It's starting to get light little by little. The dark mountains are covered with snow-white snow, and some fiery flashes fly in the air. Yang Yu calls her husband's name. The woman reaches her hands behind her neck. She is about to unfasten the massive jewelry that hangs around her neck. He says there is no point in hiding anymore. She takes some kind of pendant from her neck. It has a strange appearance, a burgundy stone encased in a pink shell. Yang Yu addresses Zhu Ying by her first name. Dongbo holds the boy's hands to prevent him from escaping. Zhu Ying looks worriedly at his mother, his arms held by his father tense. Yang Ying sits in front of the boy and hangs the pendant around his neck. He says that this pendant is a magical weapon and from now on, it belongs to Zhu Ying. The boy silently looks at his mother. Yang Chen watches this scene with a grin. It is illuminated by a light blue light. The knight looks at the tower, raising his head high. His arm is relaxed along his body. Tong Sin also looks up, his mouth slightly open. From below you can even more clearly see the huge size of the bird sitting on the tower. Yang Yu fastened the pendant around her son's neck and removes her hands, slightly holding the pendant with her fingers. The boy stands quietly in place. She asks her son to take care of the pendant and try not to use it often. She asks if he understood her. The boy turns to her questioningly, calling her mom. She sits in front, sadly pursing her lips. The boy turns to his father and looks at him with wide eyes and a slightly open mouth. Dongbo looks at his son with a slight, reassuring smile. He says that the spear technique he taught him is in this pendant. This is an important secret of the Kao Fan family. He tells his son to train hard and not be lazy. Zhu Ying also turns questioningly to Dongbo, calling him father. The whole family sits hugging. Even little Qingxi joined them. Yang Chen continues to silently watch this scene without changing his posture. The bird behind him also looks at the platform and the people on it. Yang Yu turns to Zhu Ying and asks him to take care of his brother. Dongbo and Yang Yu stood up and, turning their backs to the children, walked away from them, standing shoulder to shoulder. Zhu Ying and Qingxi are sitting on the floor. The baby is crying loudly. He is all in tears. Zhu Ying looks at her parents back in shock, sadness, and loss. The mother continues to say that even if they are no more, let the children grow up to be good people and live their lives with dignity. The bird stretched its neck forward and laid its head on the platform. Yang Yu and Dongbo climb up the bird's neck and onto its back. Zhu Ying asks them not to leave. Dongbo stands and climbs up, clenching his hands into fists. Yang Yu is above him. She turns back and looks down. Her hands are at waist level. The woman says that this is the only way out. Zhu Ying leans forward with his hand extended in front of him. Tears flow from his eyes and his mouth is wide open in a scream. He turns to Yang Chen, asking him if he can save his parents. Yang Chen half turns to the boy with a dissatisfied expression on his face. Zhu Ying rose to his feet and walked after the man, his hand extended forward. The man glances at the child and looks at him somewhat surprised. Zhu Ying asks him to help his parents. Yang Chen clutches the edge of the hood in his hand. For the first time, a wide smile shines on his face. He tells Zhu Ying to take over the Black Steel Order. Yang Yu reacts with shock and fear to these words. She looks down, a bead of sweat running down her cheek, and her mouth is slightly open in surprise. Yang Chen put the hood back on his head and turned his back to the child. Yang Yu stammers and asks about the Order of Black Steel. Yang Chen ignores her words and says that they should go. A four-winged bird flies into the air. 3 people stand on her back. Dongbo hugs Yang Yu. Below, holding onto the claw of a bird, a knight flies. The bird moves further and further from the castle. It flies over a snow-capped mountain range. The moon shines brightly high in the sky. Zhu Ying stands firmly on his feet, clenching his hands into fists. Behind him, Qingxi is on all fours, crying. The baby calls his parents. Zhu Ying repeats his uncle's words about taking over. The boy holds a spear tightly in his hand. A sleeve is pulled over the palm, with holes cut out for the fingers. The boy finishes his question about taking over the Order of Black Steel. He stands with his feet shoulder-width apart. One of his hands is clenched into a fist, the second holds a spear tightly. The ribbon holding his hair flutters in the wind. Zhu Ying looks at the dawn illuminating the peaks of the snow-capped mountains. He asks if he needs to do this. Zhu Ying keeps his hand on the back of little Qingxi, who is cuddled up to his older brother. Children look after the bird as it takes away its parents. From the expression on Zhu Ying's face, one can tell that he is angry, sad, and at the same time has firmly decided something for himself. The boy turns to his parents, telling them to just wait. He will become the strongest. 7 years later, on Mount Hymai, snow completely covers the ground. Trees with bare branches can be seen, with spruce trees standing behind them. A man dressed in dark clothes walks through the snow in the middle of the forest. Gusts of wind arise above the trees. A hood is placed over the person's head. On the back they wear a strange thing, similar to a sheath combined with a backpack. The shadow of some animal can be seen between the trees. It stands and watches the person. He notices the beast and turns his head in its direction. The face is half hidden in the shadow of the hood. Only the lips and chin are visible. The man stopped facing the animals. There are 2 of them. They come out from behind the trees, watching intently. The eyes of these creatures are completely red and glow. They have a long, elongated snout with a mouth containing many fangs. Their paws have long claws, and instead of fur they have growths that look like scales. The man took off his hood and wore red gloves on his hands that did not cover his fingers. On his head is a high ponytail, tied with an ornament. He asks himself whether the scales in front of him are black and scaly. Based on the white tips of their scales, they must be rank 3. The boy is dressed in dark green clothes with gold accents on his arms and shoulders. Along the edges of his robe, the fabric turns red. This is the matured Zhu Ying. He is already 15 years old. He addresses the animals, saying that the white tips of the scales mean that each of them has strength that can compete with the Celestial Knight himself. Zhu Ying stands in the middle of the clearing, his hair fluttering in the wind. In addition to the 2 jackals standing in front of him, another pair approaches from behind. The animals, with their mouths open, begin to run towards Zhu Ying, intending to attack him. The teenager stands calmly, pressing his hand to his chest. Zhu Ying's eyes glowed red and he bared his teeth in a smile, clenching his teeth. He clenched his hand into a fist and holds it near his chest. He says that he will now see how his diligent training in marksmanship is useful in a real fight. The jackals open their mouths. They have a huge number of sharp teeth. The animals are getting closer and closer to the young man, clearly anticipating easy prey. Zhu Ying still stands, calmly looking ahead and holding his hand near his chest. The strange apparatus on his back comes into action. Runes light up on it and snowflakes begin to fly out. A young man activates a flying snow cannon. Blue flashes of light appear on both sides of the weapon. The weapon is taken out of its sheath. Zhu Ying gives the command to undress. He holds 2 parts of a spear behind his back, on which blue runes shine. The teenager's hair flutters in the wind. He forcefully connects the 2 parts of the spear, forming a blue line at the point of contact. The monster growls loudly, its mouth wide open. He spits thick saliva when he does this. The jackal looks at its prey with its red eye. The beast jumps at Zhu Ying, bending in the air. The teenager holds a spear in front of him, its tip glowing blue. A bright flash of light illuminates Zhu Ying's face. His mouth is open. His eyebrows are furrowed so tightly that deep wrinkles have appeared. The tip of the spear goes straight into the jackal's mouth. Snowflakes scatter from the light that the weapon emits. Zhu Ying pierced the jackal right through. The spear passed through the monster's head and flew up. The teenager jumped when he attacked and is now flying forward. He lands on both feet, holding his spear hand behind his back. The carcass of the dead beast lands on the snow behind him, blood flying from the jackal. The other animal stopped and looked at what was happening. Zhu Ying smiles happily and smugly. The teenager looks at the body of the animal over his shoulder. His hand with the spear is still extended behind his back. The jackal moves towards the body of his dead brother. Zhu Ying says that they are not that strong. The jackals are watching the teenager closely. Their mouths are closed. Their red eyes express threat and aggression. Zhu Ying was afraid of something. His pupils constricted. His eyes opened wide. A bead of sweat runs down your face. He says this can't happen. A whole flock of jackals is moving from the forest towards him. They advance threateningly towards the teenager, who stands and looks directly at them. He exclaims, asking if this is an ambush. Several individuals rush at the teenager at the same time. Their mouths are open. They are about to deliver fatal blows. Zhu Ying took a fighting stance and more conveniently grabbed the spear behind his back. Zhu Ying holds a spear in front of him, blocking the jackal's blows. One of his eyes is closed. His teeth are clenched tightly. The tension from the battle and a little bit of fear are written on his face. Zhu Ying stands in the middle of the clearing with a spear in his hand. Jackals are approaching him from all sides, quite a lot of them. The guy is nervous and clearly scared. Sweat runs down his cheek and his mouth is twisted into a nervous grimace. He thinks that everything did not go according to plan. Someone is hidden in the shadows. Neither his face nor any other details of his appearance are visible, except that this creature has 6 hands in which he holds a weapon. He calls Zhu Ying's name. A man with 6 arms lands in the clearing, striking the jackals. His landing caused snow to rise into the air. This is the 6-armed snake demon Zunling. Instead of legs, he has a long tail. He wears a black cloak over his bare chest, a blue skirt with feathers and fur tied around his hips, and a large gemstone as decoration. Zunling wears a massive golden ornament around her neck. His ashen hair is pulled back into a ponytail. Hunlin looks forward with a slight frown. He turns to Zhu Ying and says that there are too many jackals here. The demon snake urges them to take the chance before they attack and retreat. Zhu Ying turns her head towards the man and looks at him in surprise. The teenager still holds the spear in front of him. He asks in surprise what Zunling is doing here. Zhu Ying calls him uncle. Jackals are approaching the man from all sides. One of them has already jumped and opened its mouth to bite. Zunling turns in his direction and looks at the beast. He cuts off a piece of the monster's flesh, and part of the jackal's mouth flies to the side. Zongling says, isn't it obvious that he cares about Zhu Ying? The man holds the jackals by the necks, preventing them from reaching Zhu Ying. Zunling spread all his arms wide to the sides, creating a human shield. Zhu Ying looks more confident and glances at the man, thanks him for his concern. Zhu Ying begins to swing his spear as he rushes forward to attack the beasts. The teenager chops them in half. Pieces of jackals fly in different directions. The guy says that he doesn't need care. The jackals roar furiously and continue to stare at the prey, which struggles violently. Zhu Ying and Zunling stand back to back, swinging their weapons in all directions, hitting the jackals. Zhu Ying looks very focused and confident. Zunling is worried about the outcome of the fight, a drop of sweat running down his cheek. Excitement is written on his face. His eyebrows are furrowed. Zhu Ying stands behind him and holds a spear in front of him, blocking the jackal's blows. The animals approach them, grinning their mouths. Zunling says that the jackals have surrounded them and now they won't let them go so easily. Zhu Ying smiles smugly. He doesn't look scared. It seems that the teenager is completely calm and knows that he can handle everything. He is completely confident in his abilities. Zhu Ying holds the spear tightly in her hands. Zunling, turning his head slightly, looks at the teenager and holds his blades at the ready. Zhu Ying tells Zongling not to worry and just leave everything to him. Zongling calls Zhu Ying a puppy and tells him not to get stuck up. The teenager still has a long way to go to achieve his mastery. Zhu Ying grins widely, clenching his teeth tightly. His eyebrows are slightly furrowed. His gaze is direct and confident. He grabbed the spear with both hands and holds it in front of him. Behind him stands Zunling, who spread his arms wide. Zhu Ying says that it is best to test this in practice. The teenager exclaims that Zunling can show him a few new moves. Zhu Ying rushes forward, holding his spear behind his back. Zunling also prepares to attack and begins to move. Jackals also do not stand still and approach people. Zhu Ying's shout signifies the beginning of the battle. Pieces of monsters fly in all directions. The blue tip of the spear flies towards the enemies. Zhu Ying will pierce 2 jackals with 1 blow. Animals wriggle in the air. The teenager lets out a cry of joy, signifying victory over the 2 monsters. Zhu Ying holds his spear with his hand. He spread his legs wide and moved his hand to the side. Another jackal rushes from behind towards the teenager. The spear is in the body of a dead beast. The weapon at the point of contact glows blue more brightly. Zhu Ying held the spear with both hands, excitement written all over his face. A bead of sweat runs down your cheek. Your teeth are clenched tightly from nerves. A jackal with its mouth open is already approaching the teenager. Zhu Ying thinks in surprise and indignation that the spear is stuck. A teenager tries to pull a spear from a jackal's carcass and does not see that 2 animals are running towards him from behind. Zunling turns his head in his direction. The man is worried, his mouth open in a scream. He warns Zhu Ying about an attack from behind. Zhu Ying gathered his emotions and looked serious. He still couldn't get the spear. He looks down thoughtfully. A red glow appears around his figure. Zhu Ying says he has no choice. The teenager holds his spear with his hand. His hair flies high up. Zhu Ying is completely shrouded in red light. The teenager uses the aura of battle. Zhu Ying smiles widely, clenching his teeth. His look is full of confidence and anticipation of a good battle. The teenager is completely shrouded in a red aura. The jackals are already reaching out to him with their teeth. Zhu Ying, overcome by the aura of battle, pierces the jackal with a spear. He stands with 1 foot on the animal's body and has a furious expression on his face. Zhu Ying glances sideways. His eyes shine with a red light. The mouth is open in a scream. He makes some sound. Something shattered into many pieces. Zhu Ying stands with his feet shoulder-width apart, his spear flying to the side. The guy's hair floats in the air. The teenager is attacked from all sides by jackals. Zhu Ying stands in a fighting stance with his spear forward, but the tip does not reach its target. The jackal runs towards Zhu Ying. The beast is about to close its jaws on the guy's hand. Zhu Ying looks fearfully at the jackal who is so close to him. The beast grabbed his hand. It's good that he was wearing a protective metal sleeve. 2 more individuals had already approached the teenager from behind. Zhu Ying lets out a surprised exclamation. The jackal is clearly not going to let go of the guy's hand and continues to hang on it. With his free hand, Zhu Ying holds the spear and tries to deflect the blows of the other beasts. He has a nervous, concentrated look on his face. He thinks that this is clearly not a good thing. Zunling anxiously turns towards Zhu Ying. The man cannot help. He is also attacked from all sides. Zongling shouts Zhu Ying's name. The jackal bit through the protective armlet. Its sharp fangs pierce the guy's arm. Blood flows from the wound. The guy looks at this anxiously. It is clear that he has already begun to get tired, and the wound is causing him significant inconvenience. He thinks that these monsters have very poisonous fangs and claws. If this continues, then he will be finished. The jackals had already grabbed onto both of Zhu Ying's hands. He spread them apart, trying to hold on. Another animal approached him from behind. Zhu Ying thinks that he seems to have no choice. The guy's eyes turn red. The eyebrows are furrowed and drawn down to the bridge of the nose. Zhu Ying raised his head to the sky and opened his mouth in a scream. There are jackals hanging on his 2 arms. Another one has come up behind him and is about to grab him. He uses his last ace up his sleeve. Zhu Ying lets out a loud scream. Zunling fights the monsters furiously. The sleeve of his cloak is torn. Sweat runs down his face as he reacts nervously to Zhu Ying's scream. The teenager is completely enveloped in red light, even touching the jackal hanging on his arm. The teenager holds a spear in his hand. Zhu Ying opened his mouth wide in a scream. Zunling is shocked. He looks towards the teenager in surprise, his eyebrows furrowed. Sweat is running down the man's face. His mouth is slightly open. The jackal has no intention of letting go of Zhu Ying. He tightens his jaw on the teenager's forearm. He screams loudly, without stopping for a second. Zunling, amazed, makes an assumption that it could be, but does not finish the sentence. Zhu Ying's teeth are clenched tightly and her mouth is bared. He uses royal blood. Zhu Ying stands with his feet shoulder-width apart and his arms out to the sides. A power wave emanates from the teenager, which scatters the jackals in different directions. Zun Ling crosses his arms in front of him, covering his face to protect himself. The man looks at what is happening in surprise and makes some strange strangled sound. A power wave with a slight red tint sweeps through the forest. The corpses of jackals lie in the clearing. Steam rises from one of them. It has already begun to get dark. Yellow lights slip between the trees. Zhu Ying says to Zong Ling that the fight between life and death is indeed different from training. He feels blood and strength running through every part of his body. Zhu Ying bandages his hand, which was bitten by a jackal. It is illuminated by the light from the fire. He says that if he trains just as hard, he will become even stronger. They made a fire in the middle of the trees. Zhu Ying sits in the snow, leaning his back against a tree. One leg lies completely on the ground, and he bends the other at the knee and tilts it slightly. Zun Ling sits nearby, his tail stretched out near the fire. He folds all his hands on his chest. Zun Ling says that these are just his instincts, inspired by survival. The man looks at Zhu Ying angrily, gritting his teeth and frowning. His whole appearance shows how dissatisfied he is. Zhu Ying looks at his interlocutor a little surprised and apprehensively. A drop of sweat runs down the guy's cheek. He holds his hand in front of his face, fingers clenched. Zong Ling reprimands Zhu Ying. He asks why he is wandering around Hymai Mountain alone. He says that Uncle Tongsan was very worried. Zhu Ying was very lucky that Zun Ling was very familiar with this area and found him in time. What would have happened if he had been attacked by a high-ranking monster? Zong Lai exclaims in alarm and condemnation as to how he would explain his death to Zhu Ying's parents. Zhu Ying's gaze was full of guilt and regret. He realized what had happened and what could have happened to him. Zun Ling is still sitting with all his hands folded. He has closed his eyes and seems to be reproaching himself for this rebuke. Steam comes out of his mouth. Zhu Ying holds his bent arm near his chest and looks at Zong Ling. The guy apologizes to the man. He tells him to forget. They won't continue to talk about it. The main thing is that he's safe. The mountain range and forest were shrouded in the darkness of night. The trees and mountains are covered with snow, which is clearly visible in the dark. How quickly time flies. Next year Qingshu will be 10 years old. Zhu Ying bandages her forearm, holding one end of the bandage in her teeth and wrapping the other end around the wound. One of his eyes is closed. With the other he watches as he bandages it. He says he's thinking about finding a magic instructor for his brother. Zhu Ying released a piece of bandage from his teeth and now holds both ends with his hands. He looks at Zun Ling with his mouth open, resting one hand on his leg. The man looks at the guy. A scabbard with blades hangs behind his back. He asks again about the magic instructor and asks him not to say that he is his candidate, but does not finish the sentence. Zhu Ying takes off the protective armlet from his arm, which was damaged by the teeth of a jackal. He looks ahead seriously. His eyebrows are furrowed. He imagines some tall man in front of him. Zhu Ying finishes the sentence for Zun Ling. His candidate is a star-level magician, the most famous teacher in the entire city of ESHY, none other than Bai Yuanjai. Zun Ling's pupils are vertical, like a snake's. He frowns and looks at Zhu Ying seriously. He asks him if Yuanjai set any conditions to become Qingshu's mentor. Zhu Ying keeps his palm on the protective sleeve of his other hand. He looks ahead seriously, tilting his chin slightly forward. Sparks from the fire fly towards him. Zhu Ying agrees and says that he demanded the freshly mined heart of the Silver Flax Wolf King, or 50,000 gold coins. Zun Ling hunches his back and looks at the teenager in shock. He opened his mouth slightly and furrowed his eyebrows in surprise, a drop of sweat running down the man's cheek. He makes a surprised sound as he asks again. Zhu Ying secures the armlet to his arm, pulling it with a red rope. The protective armor is cracked, but still remains reliable. The guy says that over the years, he spent most of his time and money honing his skills, and in this situation they would not be able to find 50,000 gold coins. The wolf stands against the backdrop of a huge shining moon. He raised his head and tail up, and another individual stood behind him. Zun Ling is still sitting with his arms crossed over his chest. He looks at the guy with a somewhat disapproving and angry expression on his face. He asks him if this is the reason he came to this mountain, in order to challenge the wolf. He is a rank 4 monster and much stronger than those black-scaled jackals they just fought. In addition to this, he has many other wolf clans under his command. Even if Zong Ling and Zhu Ying gave their all, they wouldn't stand a chance. The fire burns with a bright fire. The wood is red hot and slowly burns out. Sparks from the fire fly in different directions. Zhu Ying replies that it was for this reason that he did not intend to look for the wolf. Zun Ling looks at the teenager blankly. His gaze is directed straight and full of bewilderment. He asks what then is the purpose of Zhu Ying's wandering through this area. The teenager leaned forward slightly and looked from under his brows. His hair is in perfect condition, as if there had never been a hard battle. He starts to say a phrase, but falls silent. Zhu Ying takes out a leaflet from somewhere, on which curved, crossed swords are drawn. There are also inscriptions and red signs that look like seals. Zhu Ying smirks at the corner of his mouth, clenching his teeth. He frowns and looks firmly at his interlocutor, says it's the Scimitar League. Many people stand with their arms raised with their arms bent upward. They are all dressed in clothes that cover their faces and hair. There are gold coins in front of them, quite a lot of them. Zhu Ying suggests imagining how many treasures these bandits stole, and how many people they killed on their way. Now they are wanted, so they are hiding on Mount Hymai. If Zhongling and Zhu Ying manage to catch them, then not only will justice be served for the Snow Demon people, but they will also be able to solve their money problem. They deal with two problems, one solution. Zhongling looks at the teenager with the same amazed look. He clearly did not expect such an explanation from Zhu Ying. He furrows his brows, his gaze reflecting all his feelings. The man says that the leader of the Scimitar League, Gai Bean, is a meteor knight. Also fighting side by side with him is a heaven rank mage. In addition, under his leadership there are huge groups of thieves. The last time Zhongling faced them, he fought against small pawns, and all he succeeded in doing was forcing them to retreat. The man asks Zhu Ying if he is confident that he can defeat them. The teenager looks at the man with a self-confident look. He seems calm and has no intention of giving in. His face is illuminated by the fire from the fire. He asks Zhongling what he thinks about his strength at the moment. Zhongling closed his eyes and remembered how Zhu Ying used the ancestral blood. There is a slightly nervous smile on the man's face. He says that Zhu Ying worked hard to develop and awaken more and more fighting energy, and quite quickly, but even so, he is still Earth rank. However, when Zhu Ying used the royal bloodline burst, its power was comparable to the Silver Moon Wolf King himself. Zhongling says that he is even afraid that Zhu Ying's strength will soon outgrow him and Uncle Tongsan. Zhu Ying holds his hand near his chest. He squeezes the pendant that hangs around his neck with his fingers. Zhu Ying says that he must become stronger. Zhu Ying sits in the snow, resting his hand on his bent knee. The teenager was plunged into memories, and before his eyes was the last meeting with his parents. Yang Yu and Dongbo are standing on the bird. The woman folded her hands on her chest. The man clenched his into a fist. Zhu Ying says that 7 years have already passed since his parents were captured. He sees it all so clearly to this day, which is why he is obliged to save them. Zhu Ying remembers how Yang Chen clenched his teeth and smiled wryly. The teenager sits with one hand extended forward and fingers curled. The other he places on his wrist. He looks ahead confidently and angrily, his eyebrows furrowed. The memories do not leave him indifferent. He remembered Yang Chen's last words, his offer to take over the Order of Black Steel. The teenager says that only after he enters the domain of the Order will he have a chance to free his parents. According to his words, if he becomes stronger and is able to capture the Black Steel Order's Longshan Tower, then he will finally tell him everything. Zhu Ying tightly clenched his outstretched hand into a fist. He says that he needs to improve his skills and defeat one of the most powerful monsters. Regardless of whether it is the Yadogan League or the monsters surrounding these areas, he will crush anyone in his path. He will become stronger no matter what. Zhongling rested his lower pair of hands on his sides. The rest were also folded on his chest. He looks at Zhu Ying, who is leaning on one knee and about to stand up. The man's tail is gathered under him in a small curl. He tells Zhu Ying that he has matured very much. Zhongling and Zhu Ying react to something and turn in that direction. The man wrapped his arms around his chest and crossed his other arms over his stomach. Surprise with a hint of excitement is written on his face. A drop of sweat runs down his cheek, and his mouth is slightly open. Zhu Ying lowered one hand down, his leg bent at the knee. The teenager opened his eyes wide and opened his mouth slightly in surprise. He seems a little scared, and a bead of sweat is also running down his cheek. Someone's laughter is heard above the forest. Someone asks if his companion heard this. Do they really hope to defeat the Yadogan League? They are very naive. There are 2 people on the tree trunks. They are completely hidden in the darkness of the forest. They hold the trunk with one hand and rest their feet against it. The other hand remains free. One of them holds a weapon, and the second puts it on his leg. They continue the conversation. Someone asks where they have so much courage. They are just ordinary fools. There are 7 ranks in total and Zhu Ying is currently at the 2nd. Men jump down from trees. Zhongling looks up, directly at them. Zhu Ying just glances sideways in their direction. He looks worried and serious. Someone says that the six-armed demon, the master of the blade, has taken under his wing some brat who dares to encroach on their territory and walk through them as if at home. They fly down like blurry shadows. Two people who look like robbers landed on the snow. One of them is very tall and plump. He has a long red beard made of a ponytail. He smiles widely and viciously, placing the spiked club on his shoulder. The second man landed on one knee and looks forward with a crazy evil smile. A curved sword is clutched in his hand, and there is practically no hair on his head, not counting the mohawk. Some of them ask not to be funny. The sharp blade of a curved sword glistens in the moonlight. The man tightly grips the handle of the weapon. Zhu Ying looks at them. He clenched his teeth tightly and bared his teeth. His eyebrows are furrowed and nervous tension is visible in his eyes. A man with a mohawk has risen to his feet and holds a sword in his raised hand, the blade behind his back. His hands and half of his face are bandaged. The second man with a beard looks down and smiles widely. Zhu Ying wonders if these people are members of the Scimitar League. It looks like they don't have a heaven rank. Zhu Ying and Zhongling are standing in front of these people. The teenager positioned himself slightly in front, his legs shoulder-width apart, his arms tense and extended along his body. Di Zunling stood up on his tail and stretched it out, crossing all 6 arms over his chest. A fire is burning next to them. A man with a mohawk and a man with a baton stand holding weapons on their shoulders. The man with the curved sword laughs and asks if this child is the crazy spear lord. But he only has the rank of Earth. He asks Di Zunling when he became a nanny. Zhu Ying smiles widely, clenching his teeth. His eyebrows furrowed and drawn to the bridge of his nose. He clenched his hand into a fist and swung it. He demands to stop wagging tongues. He says that if he has the courage to dare, then let them attack. Di Zunling still stands with his arms crossed, but he has already approached the guy. The man frowned menacingly and opened his mouth wide. Zhu Ying stands proudly with his chin forward and looks at his opponent seriously. Zhongling tells Zhu Ying to stop. They still don't know the location of the Scimitar League's hideout. And since they themselves came to them, then why not grab them and interrogate them? A robber with a red beard aggressively clenched his fist and smiles widely. In his other hand he holds a club. A man with a mohawk crossed his bandaged hands in front of him and also smiles, so widely that he has very bad teeth. Redbeard asks if Lord Zhu Ying is very rich. If they bring his head and money, then Master Gai Bean will definitely be happy. The man with the mohawk threatens and tells Zhu Ying to surrender to them in an amicable way. The robbers jump forward, swinging their weapons and attack. Zhu Ying spread his legs wide, leaned his body forward slightly, and moved his arms back. Di Zunling tensed up and was also preparing for a fight. The robber continues his sentence and says that Zhu Ying will pay with his life. Di Zunling takes out the swords from the sheaths on his back, holding one in each of his hands. His eyebrows are furrowed, his gaze directed directly at his enemies. Zhu Ying grins angrily, clenching his teeth, his eyebrows also furrowed. Zunling says that they need to split up and fight separately. The man raises all 3 of his left arms up to parry the blow of the bandaged robber. He flies straight towards Di Zunding and brings his sword out in front of him, attacking. Sparks emanate from the contact of the weapon's blades. A man with a mohawk grins angrily. His whole face is wrinkled. This shows his advanced age. He watches the blades touch. The man makes some kind of strangled and dissatisfied sound. Di Zunling has a wide and furious grin on his face. His eyebrows are furrowed and he is looking tensely in front of him. The shadow of the blades is visible on his face. He says, turning to the bandaged one, that it looks like it can do something. Zunling leans back from the pressure of the man with the mohawk. He hovers in the air in front of them, legs crossed. The bandaged man opens his mouth wide, showing his uneven teeth. He has a huge, pointed nose that wrinkles because the man has furrowed his eyebrows. Bandage says that letting a child fight head-to-head with an elite like them is suicide. Di Zunling suggests preparing a coffin to bury Zhu Ying. A huge red-bearded man swings his baton and is about to strike. He smiles widely, clearly feeling his victory. However, Zhu Ying jumps high and moves out of the path of the strike. The teenager takes out parts of his weapon in the air. The guy is high above the red-bearded man's head. He looked up and looked at Zhu Ying. His smile was no longer joyful, it was more like a grin. The man asks Zhu Ying if he only knows how to dodge. Zhu Ying connected the spear and flies towards the robber. He raised one hand up and grinned widely, looking at the guy's attack. His second hand with the baton is slightly moved to the side. The robber brought his hand to his face and curled his fingers. A bead of sweat runs down his temple and he looks nervous. He says something is wrong here. Zhu Ying flies forward, pointing his spear at his opponent. He pierced the red-bearded man with his spear. He raised his hand up in a defensive gesture, but it did not help him. Zhu Ying rests his foot on a spiked club, and with one hand holds a spear that has pierced the enemy. The huge man had his eyes wide open, staring ahead in disbelief, sweat running down his face. He is amazed at how Zhu Ying was able to defeat him so quickly. The man with the mohawk turned his head towards his brother. His eyes are wide open, his teeth are clenched tightly, and beads of sweat are running down his face. Di Zunling continues to hold back the enemy's pressure, using all hands to do this. The bandaged man is surprised that his friend has been killed. A red-bearded man falls backwards into the snow. Following him is his spiked club. Zhu Ying pulled the spear out of his opponent's body and held it in his hand with the tip pointing down. The guy hovered in the air above the defeated enemy. Zunling furrowed his brows and opened his mouth in a furious cry. His opponent turned his head back to the serpent, seeming somewhat surprised. Di Zunling tells the enemy that he has opened up. The snake demon pushed the bandaged one away from him. Di Zunling spread all his arms wide to the sides, parrying the blow. The man with the mohawk flies back, throwing his arms up and losing his weapon. He makes a strangled sound from the impact. A man with a mohawk holds his hand in front of him. Its bandaged part is cut in several places. Blood is gushing from the wounds. The man looks on in shock, his mouth wide open, and he screams loudly in pain. Zunling towers over a man with a mohawk, the snake demon holding his arms menacingly in front of him. The bandaged man stands in front of him, legs spread wide and holding his sore arm. Zhu Ying stands behind him and holds a spear in his hand, throwing it over his shoulder. Di Zunling asks the bandaged man who he wanted him to prepare the coffin for. The man with the mohawk says it's cruel. The bandaged one runs away from the battlefield. He does this by jumping. The man still clutches his sore hand to himself, an angry grimace with a hint of hatred on his face. Di Zunling looks after him a little confused, spreading his arms to the sides. Zhu Ying stands next to the man and also looks at the fleeing enemy. He shouts that he will remember this to them again. Zhu Ying rushes after the bandaged man. The guy jumps forward with his arms stretched out behind his back. He looks serious and angry, his action causing snow to rise into the air. Di Zunling looks at Zhu Ying with his mouth slightly open. The man is alarmed and dissatisfied with the guy's actions. Zhu Ying shouts orders after the man with the mohawk to stop. Zunling calls the teenager's name. Zhu Ying hides in the forest, his figure lost in the darkness. Di Zunling remains standing in the clearing and looks after the boy. Next to him lies the body of a red-bearded man. Zongling reacts silently to this situation. The robber turns out to be still alive. He smiles widely, lying on his back. Di Zunling turns his head in his direction and looks at him with a serious look. Redbeard says while coughing that there are Scimitar League traps everywhere in the forest. This reckless lord will definitely die. He ends his sentence with a chuckle. Blood spews from the lying man's mouth. Di Zunling looks at him, standing a little further away. One of his hands with a sword is moved slightly to the side. He asks the red-bearded man if he still has the strength to talk idle. Why not tell him where their hiding place is? Redbeard replies that he will never tell. Di Zunling approached the prone opponent. He turned his head slightly to the side and lay completely motionless. Di Zunling stands with his hands down with his blades down. He asks someone unknown if the person lying in front of him is dead. Di Zunling is looking somewhere. He looks dissatisfied and alarmed. The corners of his lips are downturned and his eyebrows are slightly furrowed. He repeats the red-bearded man's words about the fact that there are specially prepared traps in the forest and asks himself whether this could mean that the Scimitar League's hideout is somewhere nearby. Zhu Ying quickly moves through the forest, trying to catch up with the enemy. He actively waves his hand, helping himself to run. A spear is clutched in his other hand. The guy's hair flutters from his fast running. He rushes past the trees at high speed. Zhu Ying is focused on the chase. His gaze is fixed forward, his eyebrows furrowed. His mouth is slightly open and the guy twists it a little with displeasure. Zhu Ying thinks that if he lets him go and reports their fight, there might be a problem. Zhu Ying turns his head to the side and is surprised by something. His eyes are wide open. A bead of sweat is running down his cheek. His mouth is slightly open. He clearly noticed something. Several nets are flying straight towards Zhu Ying. The guy looks at them, continuing to move forward. A blue flash of light flashes through the air. Zhu Ying, swinging his spear, cuts the nets. They break into pieces and fly off to the side. The nets fell onto the snow in front of Zhu Ying. He looks at the remains of the trap and is clearly thinking about something. The guy frowns and is a little confused. He thinks that if the net touches the body, even for a heaven-level soldier, it will be difficult to get out of it. Swears at the Yadugan League, calling its members brats. Zhu Ying stands in the middle of the clearing with his spear extended to the side. The guy's second hand is clenched into a fist, and his legs are shoulder-width apart. A man with a mohawk watches Zhu Ying from behind a tree. He looks at the guy with his mouth slightly open, probably because he is running. The Scimitar League member thinks that his case is bad. This kid is much stronger than Zunling. We need to quickly report everything to Mr. Gai Bin. Zhu Ying reacts to some movement in the forest and turns his head in that direction. He is wary and alarmed by what is happening. Zhu Ying begins to run in the direction from which he heard something. The guy is again moving rapidly through the forest, yells at the Scimitar League member to stay put and not dare to run away. A man with a mohawk grins his mouth smugly. He doesn't seem particularly stressed about being chased. He says that these territories belong to the Scimitar League and asks Zhu Ying if he thinks he can catch him. A man with a mohawk rushes forward at high speed. He turned his head a little and glanced sideways over his shoulder, a nasty smile on his face. He says that even if he was able to avoid a couple of traps, he knows them all like the back of his hand. Suddenly something happens. The man's pupil constricts greatly. He laughs loudly and continuously. The man with the mohawk continues to fly forward by inertia, but his head is already separated from his body. He doesn't seem to understand what happened. League member Scimitar's head lands on the snow with a distinctive sound. Zhu Ying stands nearby and looks at her warily. The guy didn't seem to expect to see this. He looks with fear and misunderstanding at the head of a member of the Scimitar League, which lies in the snow. Zhu Ying holds his spear ready next to him. He exclaims, stating the fact that the guy's head lies in front of him. Sweat is running down the teenager's face. His mouth is slightly open, and the corners of his lips are slightly downturned. He looks shocked and very scared. A pool of blood spreads on the snow. Zhu Ying asks what happened and how it could have happened, but he doesn't finish the sentence. He looks ahead with wide eyes, his eyebrows raised in shock, sweat running down his cheek. Behind him are dark tree trunks. Zhu Ying asks himself whether this man fell into his trap or something else happened. But he does not finish the end of the sentence. A purple glow appears in front of Zhu Ying. The guy stands with his legs wide apart. His arms are tense and he is ready to fight. Zhu Ying looks at the glow in shock. The guy's pupil narrowed greatly. He thinks about what it is. It comes towards him. In the middle of a dark winter forest, a bright flash of blue light rises up. This bright pillar soars high into the starry sky. Zunling wraps his tail around a tree trunk, and he also holds onto it with 3 hands. The man looks somewhere deep into the forest. He says this can't happen. A huge column of smoke rises high up from the forest. It begins to dawn. The sky brightens. A black beast with a muzzle resembling a panther moves forward. His eyes glow red and he has a distinctive light stripe on his forehead and nose. Zhu Ying looks at this animal with an alarmed look, turning his head slightly. His face is illuminated by a purple glow. He asks himself what it is. A bright blue flash is almost blinding. Some small purple rays appear in the background. Zhu Ying tightly clasps her hand around her spear. Birds in the forest suddenly fly into the air. A force current rushes through the forest, which scared them away. Zhu Ying takes the blow on his spear, which is behind his back. He holds it diagonally, grabbing both ends with his hands. The impact causes a bright flash. Zhu Ying, gritting his teeth, looks back over his shoulder. His eyes are wide and sweat is running down his cheek. Zhu Ying is hit in the back by a large, not black, but a purple cat. The guy is tense and trying to hold the blow. The cat presses its clawed paws against the spear. Blue runes light up on the weapon. A bright purple flash illuminates everything around. The cat waves its paws in the air. Zhu Ying flies far forward, let go of the spear. The cat behind him gasped. The spear flies in the air and flips over several times. Zhu Ying closed one eye and bared his mouth, his clenched teeth now visible. He catches the spear in the air. His eye is still closed, and his mouth is grinning. A cat rushes after the guy, sparkling red eyes. She clearly has no intention of missing out on her prey. Zhu Ying jumps into the air, holding a spear in his hand and slashing with it. The cat looks at all this in bewilderment. One of its paws is raised in the air. Because of this action, a large amount of snow rises. The tip of the spear passes close to the cat's face. The glow that comes from the weapon causes snowflakes to fly in different directions. Zhu Ying is shocked that he was unable to injure the animal. His eyes wide open, sweat running down his cheek. The mouth is also wide open and scream in surprise. The guy expresses it out loud. He drives through the snow, leaving a furrow on it and lifting it into the air. Zhu Ying holds a spear in front of her. He looks at the weapon in his hands in bewilderment. It glows and emits snowflakes. He holds it tightly in front of him, fear written all over his face. He tries in shock to say what it is. In front of him, leaning on all 4 paws, stands a huge cat. Violet energy rises from it. It is a shadow panther looking at Zhu Ying menacingly. The cat's eyes shine bright red. Zhu Ying thinks that she is a level 5 untraceable demon. Oh remembers the severed head of League member Scimitar lying in the snow. A pool of blood spread under her. Zhu Ying asks himself if she killed that elite guy from the Scimitar League in one blow. Zhu Ying smiles widely, eyebrows furrowed. He doesn't look scared, more like anticipation. The guy raised one hand, clenched into a fist, to his chin and looked straight ahead. He says that's not bad. Zhu Ying didn't expect to meet someone so strong on his first trip to Mount Hymi. The guy stands, leaning on his weapon. He brought his other hand to chest level. It is clenched into a fist. He opened his mouth and looked straight. He says that his clothes have already turned into rags. He abruptly pulled off his jacket and threw it aside. Beneath it was hidden protective armor made of the same material as the armlets. A red aura appears around Zhu Ying. The guy smiles widely, putting one hand forward. In the other he holds a spear, preparing to attack. He says that it's fortunate that Zun Ling gave him the alchemical armor, otherwise he would have died in 2 seconds. The Shadow Panther extends its muzzle forward. She opens her mouth, showing her fangs. Zhu Ying and the cat begin to run towards each other. The guy's spear glows blue, and a red glow emanates from him. He says to the Shadow Panther that he is coming after her. Zhu Ying attacks with his spear forward, his other hand clenched into a fist and extended behind his back. The guy looks concentrated, his mouth open in a scream, his eyebrows furrowed. He loudly shouts out a death wish to the panther. The panther, with its mouth wide open, looks at the spear rushing straight at it. It feels like there are 3 of them. In fact, 3 sharp spears glowing blue are flying forward. Purple smoke separates from the panther and moves towards him. This dark energy overtakes Zhu Ying and traps him in a makeshift circle. The guy frowns anxiously, clenching his teeth and twisting his mouth into a nervous grin. He still holds the spear in front of him. He is silently surprised by what is happening. Zhu Ying notices movement behind him and glances in that direction, a bead of sweat running down his cheek. There is a Shadow Panther behind him, its mouth slightly open and its red eyes sparkling. The cat raises its paw high, swinging and about to strike. She released all her sharp claws. The Shadow Panther struck the teenager. Zhu Ying flies forward with her legs and arms outstretched. He closed one eye, the other was wide open. He did not let go of the spear, it is still with him. Zhu Ying opened his mouth and probably let out a scream. It flies quite a decent distance, breaking trees on its way. Due to its flight, a large amount of snow rises into the air. Zhu Ying slams his back into a thick tree and breaks it. The impact is very powerful, causing snow to rise at the collision site. Zhu Ying is squatting, one hand resting on the snow, the other he presses to his chest. The guy bent over and lowered his head down. He makes a strangled sound, similar to a cough. The Shadow Panther takes off and leaps forward. She stretches her paws in front of her and opens her mouth wide, growling. Zhu Ying is ready to take the blow. He holds the spear with both hands and attacks. His weapons seem to multiply and instead of 1, they become 5. Zhu Ying raised his eyebrows to the bridge of his nose and opened his mouth wide in a scream. He uses a 5-sided spear. All 5 sharp spears fly towards the cat, which loses its density and becomes translucent. Zhu Ying looks at her in fear and shock. He moved his spear to the side, raising his other hand in front of him in a protective gesture. He asks himself if the panther simply dissolves during my attacks. Zhu Ying draws a circle in the air around himself with his spear. He lifts snow from the ground up. The panther stands in front of him, but at the same time she is behind him. He denies his assumption and is about to make a new one, but does not finish. Zhu Ying stands in the snow with a blue ring around him made with a spear. The panther circles around the guy, about to attack him. He thinks that she doesn't just disappear. Zhu Ying was once again enveloped in a red aura. The guy clenched his teeth tightly, sweat running down his cheek. He furrows his eyebrows and looks over his shoulder a little nervously and tensely. The Shadow Panther looks at its prey, the blue glow of the spear in front of its muzzle. Zhu Ying says she is moving too fast. He stands with his legs wide apart and his hands behind his back. His body is slightly tilted forward. There is a red aura around the guy, sweat running down his cheek. The panther seems to be on both sides of him. It dissolves in the air, becoming a shadow. Zhu Ying begins to say a sentence, but does not finish. He looks somewhere to the side. His pupil has narrowed greatly. He looks worried, a bead of sweat running down his cheek. The guy thinks that he had so many chances to attack him, so why is something happening? But again he does not follow through with the thought. The guy is breathing noisily and heavily. Zhu Ying stands in front of the Shadow Panther. The cat froze in front of him and looks with its red eyes. Zhu Ying realized what was happening. The panther realized that he could not win while he was wearing alchemical armor, so he tried to wear him down in order to deliver the final blow. Zhu Ying runs away from the battle, holding his spear in one hand, his hair flying from the speed. The cat looks after him as if perplexed. Zhu Ying says that he passed then. He clenches his teeth and looks focused. The guy quickly runs away from this place, snow rising up from under his feet. The cat stands behind him, her eyes are now normal, but then they light up red again. The shadow panther opens its mouth and lets out a roar. She begins to run after the fleeing Zhu Ying. The guy quickly moves deeper into the forest. Once again shrouded in a red aura, the teenager clenched one hand into a fist. He grins slyly and contentedly, looking towards the panther, which is moving behind him. It will make a satisfied sound, meaning that everything is going according to plan. His spear draws a streak of blue light in the air, snowflakes scattering from the tip. Zhu Ying, shrouded in a red aura, turns back and opens his mouth wide in a scream. His eyes are also rounded, and his eyebrows are drawn down to the bridge of his nose. The cat rushes straight towards the spear, its mouth open. The panther's eyes glow red, but a blue glow is reflected in them. Zhu Ying asks a question while shouting, asking if she isn't fast and ordering her to come to him. The guy and the panther flew past each other, the guy's spear pointed forward. His hair flew into the air. The cat is wounded and blood is gushing from its body. Zhu Ying smiles broadly and contentedly as he continues to move forward in the air. He exclaims joyfully that he succeeded. The shadow panther lands on the snow, but it is still standing. Blood drips from her wound and falls straight onto the snow. Zhu Ying stands with his back to her, legs spread wide. There is a long wound running down the panther's side, from which blood flows in a stream. The cat grins angrily, its mouth open. Zhu Ying turns around and looks at her. His teeth are clenched, his eyes are wide open, and a bead of sweat is running down his cheek. He looks nervous and wary. Zhu Ying exclaims, was she really able to dodge? He begins to say something about a demon, but does not complete the sentence.